And there's John Negroponte again.
Nice.
The US ambassador to the new government. So he was previously, John Negroponte was previously the US ambassador to the UN. And so in the documents that we studied, if you guys have not been with us before, I strongly suggest that you go back and watch the episodes where we are studying the documents about the United States mission to the United Nations. What we learned, amongst many things, is that NSA has staff that are permanently stationed to do nothing other than spy on the UN members.
And interface with the UN,
the US. And that the US mission, they call it the US mission to the UN, meaning the diplomats that go to supposedly do diplomacy at the UN.
Exactly.
Can order up 24/7 SIGINT out of the NSA on all of the other countries and the deals and who's going to vote which way and who thinks what and does what and said what and where they went and who they know and everything else before they roll up into the UN floor. So when they're going in to table these resolutions, they already know who's going to vote for them and who's not going to vote for them. They already know which provisions people are going to support or veto. They already have all this information at their fingertips. So what they're doing on the UN floor is actually like this kind of pantomime. They're just going and acting out what they already know is going to happen in advance. Exactly. It's a very strange thing. It's very, very strange to me. It's also it also is really counter to this whole idea of like what diplomacy is supposed to be. Like diplomacy is supposed to be negotiation, but how can you negotiate effectively if somebody already knows everything about you, what you're up to, what your bottom lines are, it's like the whole thing is just weighted against the success of any other country except for the US, funnily enough.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is that, so this is not just the state, like the United States interfacing at the UN and playing power moves. This is our intelligence agency directly interfacing with the UN, like you said. And that goes beyond even back channel diplomacy, where you might somehow in a secret room have a secret telephone that calls a different intelligence agency, or whatever. This is direct, sort of out in the open interference with politics in a direct way. It's like their own little nation. And it's interesting as it brings up the question for me about whether other countries' intelligence agencies are potentially also interfacing with the UN, because if the NSA is doing it, I don't think that bars anybody else's agency from.
They must be doing it. It must be standard practice. And it reminds me of something else that Snowden said this year about the whole Russiagate thing. He said, of course, an intelligence agency is meddling in an election. That's what they do. That's like one of their purposes. It's like standard practice, par for the course. Of course, they will try to influence the outcome of democratic elections. And then WikiLeaks had dropped the documents back in, was it February? Or I think it was February. It
was early.
WikiLeaks dropped documents which were actual dispatch orders from the CIA, dispatching spies from all Five Eyes nations to France to spy on the French presidential elections in 2012. Not just spy.
Yeah, that was important. That was really important.
To infiltrate with human intelligence, sending teams of spies from each of these countries to infiltrate the political parties present in the French election. So France is supposed to be an ally. And so the CIA is infiltrating and having other countries infiltrate the political parties in a democratic election of an ally. So imagine what they're doing to like Russia's elections, or someone who's not an ally.
Yeah, and even though it's been a few months since that happened, somebody needs to write a full article on that specific instance, because that was really important.
Absolutely, and that was why I used my big mainstream media interview in New Zealand this year to bring that exact point home.
Awesome.
Because how can we sit around going, oh, Russia meddled in the elections like it's like some scandalous thing, whether they did or not? I mean, there's ample evidence that they didn't meddle in the way that they've been accused of meddling.
Exactly.
They've been accused of meddling. Like for the whole CrowdStrike DNC stuff, there's obviously a lot more going on than just Russia meddling in the elections. But even if Russia had meddled in the elections, it would be par for the course, not only for Russia, but for every intelligence agency in the world. So I think you are probably spot on when you say that these other countries clearly would also be using their intelligence agencies. But then the question would be, what other country in the world has the kind of reach of, other than perhaps Israel, has the kind of intelligence reach that the United States does? Because what we see with their 45 eyes of their NATO and partner countries in Afghanistan and whatnot, they are siphoning up all of the data of these so-called partner nations, as well as the data of every other country on earth. And simply, who else can compete with that?
Exactly.
Not a level playing field.
Exactly.
And the UN is supposed to be a level playing field.
Yeah, well, it's definitely not, at least it's definitely not something where I think people would expect to go in and just see intelligence agencies out in the open interacting. I think people do assume that it's, on the level of states coming in and having their voices heard. So I think that specific aspect of that is probably new and important for people to understand.
Right, so that was the first factor that was new. But then the second factor was that the NSA was in one of the documents, and this is yet another reason I say you should go back and watch the earlier episodes of Decipher if you haven't. The other major aspect was that the NSA was taking credit for the content of the speeches of the President of the United States.
Yeah, that was huge.
Which was at that time George W. Bush. And Colin Powell, so the Secretary of State and the President of the United States, of their speeches where they were exhorting all of the countries of the world to join them in their totally illegal invasions of Iraq.
And it was failed intelligence, and even Colin Powell, even Colin Powell said that was a failed.
The weapons of mass destruction, the 45 minutes to launch a weapon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The NSA is directly bragging in their documents that they were behind that they had contributed that to the mission. So that's the second element. So the first element is that they're providing this live SIGINT to 24/7 to the US UN mission, but they also have been responsible for faulty intelligence, which has caused the death literally of millions of people.
Definitely.
So when you combine those two elements, you begin to see how dangerous it is. Then the other thing is that when we went back and actually studied those speeches, we went and re-watched the speeches for which the NSA claimed responsibility for the intelligence. And we understood that those speeches were directly used not just as a pretext for war, but they were also used as a pretext by which to get the UN involved post-invasion to take over responsibility for the cleanup of the war. And that was when we began to understand that even where the UN does not endorse the invasion, the UN is inevitably engaged in the follow-up. In the cleanup. So the US managed to convince the UN, hey, you guys need to take responsibility for securing this country, you need to get all of your NGOs in here, all of your big UN, programs, development programs, or whatever else need to come and have a presence here. And what the upshot of that is the UN spending billions of dollars of international money on cleaning up after a unilateral US invasion.
Absolutely.
And in that way, the UN is used to almost retrospectively whitewash it. Because if the UN is engaged at that level, then it tacitly exonerates the US. Even though we know that they never should have gone in and that they broke international laws to do it, the fact that they're then able to convince the UN to come on board and clean up their mess is significant. And,
absolutely.
And that yet again, that came back to NSA. NSA was again bragging about having supplied the information for the speech which Colin Powell made to engage the UN and get them on board post-invasion.
Yeah.
So it's extremely significant. And John Negroponte was that, which is how we've even got onto this little rant. John Negroponte was that US to UN ambassador.
Yeah.
He left there and was sent to, now hang on a second, did he go from Iraq to, no, he must have gone from there to Iraq because he's now in Iraq, and this is in chronological order, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was sent to Iraq. Now, the next thing that's significant about Negroponte is that he is a massive war criminal. And he was up in all of that Latin American death squads and everything else. Like, he had like decades of experience and it was after he got involved in Iraq that the Shiite death squads and all of that stuff showed up. And that's why 2006, 2007, Iraq completely destabilized and became even 100,000 times worse than it was during the invasion. And it was people like him, their arrival in Iraq, which heralded that really, really dark time that came to follow.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I had a friend that was involved in that time, just served a tour, and they talked about some of that a little bit, like the horrible stuff like that was happening. So definitely a bad time. Absolutely.